The weight of eternity. The morning light of twin suns filtered through the crystalline windows of Zephon Caldris's workshop, casting prismatic rainbows across the stone floor where he had been working for the past 3 decades. His latest sculpture, a magnificent rendering of the mythical sky whale of Ethros, was nearly complete, requiring only the most delicate finishing touches that might take another century to perfect. At 50,000 years old, Zephon was considered barely middle-aged by Caldorian standards. His people, the children of Ethros, had witnessed the birth and death of stars, had seen galaxies spiral into existence, and had cultivated patience as both an art and a necessity. Every movement was deliberate, every decision weighed against the backdrop of eternity. Zephon called Nisa Verdanis from the garden beyond his workshop. Her voice carried the melodic quality that came from millennia of careful speech, each word chosen with the precision of a master craftsman. The morning news feeds are particularly interesting today. Zephon set down his quantum chisel, a tool his grandfather had crafted 12,000 years ago, and stretched his elongated form. His joints cracked with the satisfying sound of ancient machinery finding its rhythm. The stretch itself was a masterpiece of efficiency, developed over centuries of refinement until every muscle fiber engaged in perfect mathematical harmony. More philosophical debates about the nature of time? He asked, gliding over to where Nisa tended her millennium-old garden. Some of her flowers had been growing for longer than entire civilizations had existed. Something far more curious, she replied, her amber eyes reflecting an emotion Zephon rarely saw there. Genuine surprise. It seems we've discovered a new species. They call themselves humans. Zephon settled beside her, his massive frame dwarfing the crystalline bench that had been carved from a single meteor fragment. New species discover us frequently enough. What makes these humans particularly noteworthy? Nisa activated the holographic display that materialized above her palm. The image showed bipedal creatures, barely 2 meters tall, covered in what appeared to be artificial skins. They looked fragile, almost embryonic compared to the robust Caldorian form. They're mortal, Nisa said, the word carrying a weight of both pity and fascination. Their entire species has existed for less than 1 million years. Individual lifespans measure in mere decades. Zephon studied the creatures with the same attention he gave to particularly challenging sculpture details. Fascinating. Another of the universe's brief experiments. Though I admit surprise that they've achieved spaceflight at all. Usually, species with such abbreviated existence cycles burn out long before developing the patience necessary for interstellar travel. The display shifted to show star charts marked with expanding territories. That's not the remarkable part, Nisa continued. They've colonized 17 systems in the past 1,000 years. The Hegemony Council has issued a formal request for them to vacate the Xerion cluster. Those worlds contain the titanium deposits we need for our new hyperspace shielding project. And? Zephon asked, though he suspected the answer would be typically predictable. They've refused. These humans claim that because they've lived on those worlds for 40 generations, they have established territorial rights. Zephon's laughter was a sound like distant thunder, echoing off the workshop walls. 40 generations? I've had garden tools older than their entire colonial presence. Surely the council explained the situation to them properly. Councillor Thane Maximus handled the negotiations personally. He offered them relocation to any of 300 uninhabited systems, along with full technological assistance for the transition. The humans called it insulting and genocide. Genocide? Zephon's amusement faded slightly. That's a strong word for a relocation offer. They seem to experience attachment to physical locations with unusual intensity. Something about their brief lifespans makes them form emotional bonds to places within years rather than millennia. Nisa's tone carried the clinical fascination of a botanist studying an unusual growth pattern. The xenopsychology reports suggest it's related to their rapid reproductive cycles and high mortality rates. Poor creatures, Zephon murmured. To live with such urgency, such desperation. No wonder they can't think clearly about reasonable solutions. The display updated automatically, streaming the latest diplomatic reports. Zephon read with growing incredulity as human representatives continued to reject increasingly generous offers. The Kaldorian hegemony had proposed giving them entire star clusters in exchange for the mining rights to 17 worlds, yet the humans persisted in their obstinate refusal. "This is becoming tedious," he said finally. "Perhaps it's time for the Council to simply proceed with the mining operations. These humans will adapt or relocate on their own once they see the inevitability of the situation." "I'm afraid it's gone beyond that point," Nisa said softly, calling up another news feed. "Military intervention was authorized this morning. The Eternal Fleet has been dispatched to remove the human colonies." Zephon nodded approvingly. The Eternal Fleet represented the culmination of 10 billion years of technological advancement. Each ship was a masterwork crafted over centuries, crewed by warriors who had honed their skills across millennia of battle. Against such perfection, these humans, with their hastily constructed vessels and brief, inexperienced lives, could offer no meaningful resistance. "The matter should be resolved within the year," he said, returning his attention to his sculpture. "Perhaps less, depending on how quickly the humans recognize reality." But as the days passed, the news feeds brought increasingly disturbing reports. The humans, far from submitting to the inevitable, had struck back with shocking ferocity. 3 entire Kaldorian battle groups had gone silent in the Zerion cluster. Intelligence suggested the humans were using some form of communication jamming that prevented even emergency distress signals from reaching the hegemony. "Impossible," Counselor Thane Maximus declared during an emergency broadcast. His own 50,000-year lifespan had encompassed wars against species far more advanced than these primitive humans. "Our ships are crewed by veterans with millennia of combat experience. Each vessel represents centuries of engineering perfection. These humans build their craft in mere decades, their flying in technological garbage compared to our fleet." Yet the silence from the Zerion cluster continued. Days turned to weeks, and the absence of communication became a growing weight of dread that settled over the normally serene Kaldorian Empire. Zephon found himself unable to concentrate on his sculpture. For the first time in centuries, his hands shook as he held the quantum chisel. The morning routines that had sustained him for millennia felt hollow, meaningless against the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted in the universe. "Perhaps," Nisa suggested quietly, "we underestimated them." It was Zephon who first noticed the ships. He had stepped outside to observe the evening sky, a ritual he'd performed for 40,000 years, when the stars began to move. At first, he assumed it was atmospheric distortion, but the patterns were too organized, too purposeful. "Nisa," he called, his voice tight with an emotion he hadn't felt in millennia. "Fear, come quickly." She joined him in the garden, following his gaze upward. Against the backdrop of eternal stars, sleek shapes moved with impossible speed. They were small compared to Kaldorian vessels, but they moved like living things, weaving through space with an agility that defied everything Zephon understood about starship design. "Human ships," Nisa whispered. As they watched, streaks of light began falling from the sky. Not meteors, weapons fire. The automated defense platforms that had protected Ethros for 1,000,000 years were engaging the human fleet. The ancient weapon systems, each a masterwork of defensive engineering, opened fire with the measured precision of eons. For 17 minutes, the sky blazed with defensive fire. Then abruptly, the shooting stopped. "The platforms," Zephon began. "Gone," Nisa finished. "All of them." In 50,000 years of life, Zephon had never experienced true terror. He had witnessed the death of stars, the collapse of civilizations, the entropy of entire galactic clusters. But those were natural processes predictable in their vast scales. This was something else entirely. The impossible made manifest. The human ships descended like falling stars, their engines screaming through Ethros' atmosphere, with a sound like the universe itself being torn apart. They landed not with the careful precision Zephon expected from spacefaring vessels, but with the controlled violence of predators. Standing in his garden, surrounded by flowers that had bloomed for longer than human civilization had existed, Zephon Kaldris realized that his people's greatest strength their patient, eternal perspective, might also be their greatest weakness. The humans were coming, and they moved with the terrifying speed of creatures who knew their time was short. The blur of war. The first human appeared at Zephon's door before the echoes of the landing craft had faded from the sky. Zephon had lived through the rise and fall of civilizations, had witnessed cosmic events that spanned millennia, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer speed of the creature standing on his threshold. The human, barely reaching Zephon's waist, seemed to vibrate in place, its movements creating a strange blur effect that made Zephon's ancient eyes water. "Greetings," the human said, though the word came out as a high-pitched whine. Then, as if adjusting some internal mechanism, the voice slowed to an almost comprehensible pace. "We seek dialogue." Nysa emerged from behind Zephon, her millennia of botanical patience serving her well as she studied this impossible visitor. "You move so quickly," she observed. "How do you not exhaust yourselves?" The human, Zephon could now see it, was wearing some form of identification that read, "Lat Nakamura," tilted its head in what might have been confusion. To the Kaldorians, the gesture appeared as a rapid flickering motion. "We are moving slowly for you," Litter Nakamura replied, each word carefully separated. "Normal speed would be incomprehensible." Another human materialized beside the first, literally materialized as far as Zephon could tell. One moment the doorway held one visitor, the next there were two. This one's identification. "It's Sergeant Martinez, sir," Martinez said to Nakamura, the word emerging as a sharp buzz. They exchanged what appeared to be an entire conversation in a series of rapid-fire sounds that lasted perhaps 3 seconds, though Zephon suspected volumes of information had been communicated. "We understand," Nakamura said, returning attention to the Kaldorians, "that there has been misunderstanding. May we enter? We bring peace offering." Zephon's ancient mind struggled to process what he was witnessing. These humans moved and spoke as if the universe itself was running at the wrong speed. It was like watching hummingbirds attempt to communicate with mountains. "Please," he said, stepping aside. "Enter our home." The humans blurred past him, and suddenly Zephron's carefully arranged living space was filled with the sound of frantic activity. He caught glimpses of movement. One human examining his sculpture, another studying Nysa's botanical displays, a third apparently reading through their entire library of stored knowledge. Within moments, they had gathered in the center of the room, their examination complete. "Beautiful work," Nakamura said, gesturing toward Zephon's sculpture. "How long have you been carving?" 37 years on this piece," Zephon replied, feeling a strange pride at the human's appreciation. "Though I began learning the art some 40,000 years ago." The humans exchanged another burst of rapid communication, and Zephon caught what sounded like amazement in their incomprehensible chatter. 40,000 years, Martinez repeated slowly. "For one skill?" "Of course," Nysa interjected gently. "True mastery requires patience, dedication across centuries. How long do your people typically study a craft?" "Decades," Nakamura admitted. "We rarely have more time." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Zephon began to understand something profound about these creatures. They lived their entire existence in the time it took him to complete a single, careful thought. "The war," Zephon said finally. "Our fleets. What happened to them?" Nakamura's expression, what Zephon could see of it through the blur of movement, became solemn. "No. Deaths," the human said carefully. "Your people are safe." "Impossible," Zephon breathed. "The reports said hundreds of casualties." "Communication disruption," Martinez interjected. "Your ships move too slowly. We disabled their systems before they could respond. The implications hit Zephon like a physical blow. The Eternal Fleet, with its centuries of tactical expertise and technological superiority, had been neutralized not through superior firepower, but through sheer speed. The humans had moved so quickly that Kaldorian crews, with their patient, methodical approach to combat, had been unable to react in time. But surely, Lysa said, your rapid movements must be exhausting. How do you sustain such pace? Another rapid exchange between the humans, followed by what sounded distinctly like laughter, though pitched at frequencies that made the Kaldorians' ears ring. This is normal for us, Nakamura explained. We have slowed dramatically to speak with you in our time. This conversation has lasted hours. Zephon's mind reeled. Hours? They had been speaking for perhaps 10 minutes by Kaldorian reckoning, but to these creatures with their accelerated perception, it had been an epic discourse. The mining dispute, he said, pieces of understanding beginning to coalesce. You weren't being unreasonable. You were trying to explain something we couldn't comprehend quickly enough. 40 generations, Martinez confirmed. In your time, perhaps brief. In our time, vast history. Would you abandon world where ancestors lived for thousands of years? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Zephon had believed about the universe. To the Kaldorians, 1,000 years was barely a season. To humans, it represented the entirety of their colonial history, the graves of their ancestors, the foundation of their culture. A new sound filled the room, the deep, resonant chime that indicated priority communications from the Kaldorian government. Zephon activated the holographic display, and the image of Elder Vox Threnody appeared, his ancient features grave with concern. Citizens of Ethros, Threnody intoned, we must inform you that our military forces have suffered an unprecedented defeat. However, we have received communication from the human leadership. They wish to negotiate. The humans in Zephon's living room exchanged another rapid burst of communication, and suddenly a third figure materialized. An older human with identification reading, Ambassador Zhao. Greetings, Elder Threnody, Zhao said, her voice carrying the careful cadence the humans seemed to reserve for communicating with Kaldorians. We apologize for the disruption. May we establish formal communication? Threnody's ancient eyes widened as he took in the scene. Humans standing in a Kaldorian home, apparently having arrived faster than official diplomatic channels could even arrange contact. How? He began, then seemed to reconsider. Yes, we welcome negotiation. The mining worlds, Zhao continued, contain materials we both need. Perhaps we can share, rather than fight, share. Threnody's voice carried millennia of diplomatic experience, but also genuine confusion. You would accept joint operations? We never refused sharing, Zhao replied. We only refused displacement. Your representatives demanded we leave entirely. Zephon watched as understanding dawned on the elder's features. The humans had never rejected cooperation. They had rejected abandonment. But the communication gap, the vast difference in temporal perception, had made true dialogue impossible. Counselor Maximus, Threnody said slowly, approached negotiations with standard century-long deliberation protocols. You responded within days. He interpreted your rapid responses as hasty rejection rather than urgent acceptance. And we interpreted his delays as dismissal, Nakamura added. We thought you were ignoring our offers. The room fell silent except for the subtle humming that seemed to surround the humans, the sound of beings whose very existence operated at frequencies beyond normal perception. So much death, Nisa whispered, because we couldn't learn to speak at the same speed. No death, Martinez corrected gently. Your people live. Our people live. Only misunderstanding died. Today, Zephan looked at his sculpture, at the work that had consumed decades of his life, and suddenly understood something profound about the nature of time itself. The humans weren't cursed with brief lives. They were blessed with the ability to experience vast depths of existence in compressed time. Every moment held the weight of eternity for them because eternity was all they had. We have much to learn from each other, he said finally. Perhaps you could slow down enough to teach us urgency, and we could slow you down enough to teach you patience? The humans' laughter, when slowed to Kaldorian comprehension, was like music, bright and joyful and alive with possibilities. We would like that, Ambassador Zhao replied. But first, we must prevent more misunderstandings. The universe is large enough for both our peoples. As the twin suns set over Ethros, casting long shadows through Zephan's workshop, he realized that his greatest masterpiece wouldn't be carved from stone. It would be built from understanding, patience, and the recognition that time itself could be shaped by those brave enough to challenge their own perceptions. The humans departed as quickly as they had arrived, leaving behind only the lingering sense that the universe had somehow become larger and smaller simultaneously. Zephan returned to his sculpture. But now each careful stroke of the chisel carried new meaning. Not the patient perfection of eternity, but the urgent beauty of moments that mattered precisely because they were brief. In the garden, Nisa tended flowers that had bloomed for millennia, but now she saw them through human eyes as well, not as eternal fixtures, but as living miracles. Each day of existence, a precious gift in a universe where time moved at the speed of thought, the speed of love, the speed of life itself. The war was over. Understanding had begun,